It was one of those ordinary Tuesday mornings in Los Angeles, the kind where the sky is clear, the air smells faintly of coffee and car exhaust, and most people are just trying to get through their to-do lists without too much drama. Keanu Reeves was no different. He had a few errands to run, and one of them involved stopping by his bank to sort out some personal paperwork. Nothing flashy, nothing urgent, just the kind of quiet behind-the-scenes stuff most folks never see celebrities doing. He didn't drive himself that day. Not because he couldn't. He's known to zip around the city on his motorcycle when he feels like it, but because he'd asked his longtime driver to come along. This man had been with him for years, not just as someone who handled the wheel, but as a trusted companion on long drives, early call times, and late-night returns from film sets. They'd shared countless miles, silent rides, and the kind of easy conversation that only comes from mutual respect and time. The driver was in his late 50s, with kind eyes, a calm presence, and a habit of always wearing a clean, pressed shirt even on casual days. He wasn't flashy. He didn't seek attention. He simply did his job with quiet dignity, the kind that goes unnoticed unless you're really paying attention, and Keanu always paid attention. They pulled up to a mid-sized bank branch in a quiet part of the city, not the kind with marble floors and velvet ropes, but a regular neighborhood bank where people came to deposit paychecks, cash checks, or ask about loans. Keanu had an appointment with a private banking representative, so his driver went in first to let the front desk know they'd arrived. It was a small courtesy, the kind of thing he'd done 100 times before. Inside, the bank was busy but not chaotic. A few people waited in line. Others filled out forms at the tables near the entrance. The driver walked up to the reception area and politely said, "I'm here with Mr. Reeves. We have an 11 a.m. appointment." The receptionist nodded and asked him to take a seat in the waiting area near the private client section, a slightly more comfortable zone with leather chairs and a water dispenser, reserved for clients with appointments. He sat down, hands folded in his lap, eyes on the floor, giving others their space. That's when things took a turn. A man in a crisp suit, clearly a manager, walked by, glanced at the driver, and stopped short. He looked him up and down like he was inspecting a misplaced package. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice sharp with suspicion. "I'm waiting for Mr. Reeves," the driver replied calmly. "We have an appointment." The manager frowned. "Mr. Reeves? Keanu Reeves?" "Yes, sir." The man let out a short, skeptical laugh. "Right, and you are—" "I'm his driver." That's when the tone shifted. The manager's expression hardened. He crossed his arms and spoke loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "This area is for clients only. Drivers wait outside or in the general lobby. You can't just sit here like you own the place." The words landed like a slap. A few people turned their heads. The driver didn't flinch, but his shoulders tensed slightly. He stood up slowly, keeping his voice steady. "I was asked to wait here by the front desk." "Well, they made a mistake," the manager snapped. "This isn't a waiting room for chauffeurs. Please step outside." There was no apology in his voice, no attempt to soften the blow. Just cold dismissal, wrapped in the assumption that someone who drove a car for a living didn't deserve the same courtesy as the person in the passenger seat. The driver didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, turned, and walked toward the main lobby, head high, back straight. But anyone who looked closely could see the quiet hurt in his eyes. It wasn't about the chair or the water dispenser. It was about being seen, about being treated like a person, not a prop. Outside, Keanu was just stepping out of the car. He'd taken a little longer than expected, signing an autograph for a young fan who'd recognized him from across the street. He was used to these moments, always gracious, always patient. But as he approached the bank entrance, he noticed his driver standing near the glass doors. Not inside where they'd planned to meet. Something felt off. Keanu pushed the door open and immediately sensed the shift in the room. The air was thick with awkward silence. A few people avoided eye contact. Others glanced between the driver and the manager, who was now pretending to check something on his tablet, though his ears were red. Keanu walked straight to his driver. Not with dramatic strides, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knows exactly what's happening. He didn't ask what was wrong. He could read it in the set of the man's jaw, the way his hands were clasped a little too tightly. He placed a hand gently on his driver's shoulder. "You're with me," he said, voice low but clear. Then he turned to face the room, not with anger, but with a calm intensity that made people stop what they were doing. The manager looked up, startled. Recognition flickered across his face. His mouth opened, then closed. He suddenly looked very small in his expensive suit. Keanu didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. He simply said, "I'd like to speak with whoever's in charge here now." The receptionist, wide-eyed, stammered, "Oh, of course, Mr. Reeves, I'll get the branch director." As they waited, Keanu stayed close to his driver, offering silent support. No grand speeches, no performative outrage, just presence, just loyalty. And in that moment, the entire mood of the bank changed. The people who'd overheard the earlier exchange suddenly felt ashamed. The manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And the driver? He stood a little taller, not because of the celebrity beside him, but because someone had reminded him without words that his worth wasn't defined by a job title or a uniform. What happened next would ripple far beyond that bank, but for now, in that quiet Tuesday morning, it was enough that one man chose to stand beside another when the world tried to push him aside. The branch director arrived within minutes, flustered, adjusting his tie and clearly trying to compose himself as he approached. He'd been in a meeting upstairs when the receptionist rushed in, whispering urgently that Keanu Reeves was downstairs and not happy. That was all it took. The man practically sprinted down the stairs, rehearsing apologies in his head before he even saw what had happened. When he reached the lobby, he took in the scene at a glance. Keanu standing calmly beside his driver, both of them quiet but radiating a kind of quiet strength that made the air feel heavier. The manager, the one who'd made the comment, was hovering nearby, face pale, looking like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. "Mr. Reeves," the director said, extending a hand with a nervous smile. "So sorry for the wait. We're honored to have you here. Please come this way, we have a private room ready for your appointment." Keanu didn't take the hand right away. He looked the director in the eye, his expression calm but serious. "Before we go in," he said, voice low but firm, "I need to talk to you about something that just happened." The director's smile faltered. He glanced at the driver, then back at Keanu. "Of course, anything." They moved to a small consultation room just off the main floor. Wood-paneled walls, a round table, 2 chairs. The director gestured for them both to sit, but Keanu remained standing until his driver was comfortably seated. Only then did he take the chair beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it spoke volumes. This wasn't just business. This was personal. For a moment there was silence. The kind of silence that makes you notice the hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of a printer clicking, your own heartbeat. Then Keanu spoke. "I've known this man for over 15 years, he began, not with anger, but with a quiet sincerity that made the director lean in. "He's driven me through blizzards in Canada, desert heat in Arizona, and 3 a.m. pickups after 18-hour shooting days. He's never been late, never complained, never asked for anything extra. He shows up, does his job with dignity, and treats everyone he meets with respect, even when they don't return the favor." The director swallowed hard. He knew exactly what this was about. "Just now," Keanu continued, "he walked into your bank, a place that's supposed to serve people, and was told, in front of others, that he didn't belong here because of what he does for a living, that he should wait outside like the help." He paused, letting the words settle. "I don't care if he's a driver, a chef, a teacher, or a CEO. Every person who walks through your doors deserves to be treated with basic human decency, especially in a place that handles people's money, their security, their trust." The director looked down at his hands. "Mr. Reeves, I had no idea. I swear this isn't how we operate. That was completely out of line." "I believe you," Keanu said, "but belief isn't enough. Actions are." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten lawsuits or social media exposure. He simply stated what needed to be said, like he was talking to a friend who'd made a mistake, not an enemy. That made it harder to ignore. The director nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, and I want to make this right. Right now." Keanu glanced at his driver, who had been silent the whole time, eyes fixed on the table. "It's not about me," Keanu said gently. "It's about him. He didn't deserve that. And he deserves to hear it acknowledged, not just from me, but from your team." The director stood up immediately. "I'll gather the staff. I'll make sure everyone hears this." "No need for a big speech," Keanu said. "Just a sincere apology, in front of the people who saw it happen. That's all." The director hesitated for just a second. maybe wondering if this was overkill, if it would embarrass his employee too much. But then he saw the look in Keanu's eyes. There was no malice there, only fairness. Only care. Okay, he said. I'll do it. They walked back out into the main area. The bank had quieted down a bit. Lunch hour was approaching and some customers had left. But the manager was still there pretending to file papers at a desk, though his hands were shaking slightly. The director cleared his throat. Everyone, can I have your attention for a moment? A few employees looked up. The receptionist stopped typing. Even a customer waiting in line turned around. I need to address something that happened earlier today, the director said, his voice steady now. One of our visitors, a valued guest of this bank, was treated with disrespect by a member of our team. That behavior does not reflect our values. It was wrong. It was unprofessional, and it will not be tolerated. He turned to the driver, who had risen to his feet again, looking uncomfortable but composed. To you, sir, the director said. On behalf of this entire branch, I sincerely apologize. You were here as a guest and you deserve to be welcomed, not judged. We failed you and I'm truly sorry. The room was silent. Even the manager looked down, shamefaced. Then something unexpected happened. One of the tellers, a young woman who'd witnessed the whole thing, stepped forward. I'm sorry too, she said softly. I should have said something. Another employee nodded. Me too. It wasn't a scripted moment. It was human, real, messy, and in that moment, the tension in the room began to dissolve, not because of who Keanu Reeves was, but because of what he'd quietly inspired: accountability, humility, and a reminder that kindness costs nothing. Keanu didn't say, I told you so. He didn't smirk or gloat. He simply turned to his driver and gave him a small, knowing look, the kind that says, see? You matter. Then he turned back to the director. Thank you, he said. That's all I needed, but it wasn't really all. Because what happened next? The way the driver stood a little taller, the way the staff exchanged glances with new understanding, the way the atmosphere in the bank shifted from cold formality to something warmer, those were the real results. And Keanu, ever the observer of human nature, saw it all. He knew the appointment could wait. The paperwork could wait. What couldn't wait was making sure someone he cared about felt seen, respected and valued, not because of who they worked for, but because of who they were. As they walked back toward the private room, the director trailing behind them, Keanu kept his pace slow, matching his driver's steps. No rush, no performance. Just two men moving through the world side by side, reminding everyone around them without saying a word that true strength isn't in fame or fortune, but in how you treat the person standing next to you when no one's watching. And in that ordinary bank on an ordinary Tuesday, something extraordinary had just happened. Not because a celebrity walked in, but because one human being chose to stand up for another. Quietly, firmly, completely. The private consultation room felt different now, quieter, softer, like the air itself had exhaled. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the polished table. Keanu sat down again, this time without hesitation, and gestured for his driver to do the same. The branch director remained standing near the door, still visibly shaken, as if he were waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Keanu wasn't here to punish anyone. He never had been. He leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the table, not in a show of authority, but in openness. I didn't come here to cause trouble, he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. I came because something didn't sit right with me. And when something doesn't sit right, I've learned it's better to say something than to walk away pretending it didn't happen. The director nodded slowly. I understand. And I appreciate you handling this the way you did. Most people would have just left and never come back. Maybe, Keanu said with a small shrug, but walking away doesn't fix anything. It just lets the problem stay hidden. He paused, glancing at his driver, who sat quietly, eyes down but listening closely. This man has been part of my life longer than most people I know. He's seen me at my best and my worst. He's driven me to hospitals, to funerals, to movie premieres where the world cheered, and back to empty apartments where no one was waiting. Through all of it, he's never once acted like he was doing me a favor. He just shows up. With kindness. With patience. With respect. Keanu turned back to the director. So when someone treats him like he's less than, like he's invisible just because of his job, it doesn't just hurt him. It says something about the place that allows it to happen. The director swallowed. You're right, and I take full responsibility. That kind of attitude has no place here. I'll be speaking with the manager involved and we'll be reviewing our customer service training immediately. Keanu nodded, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. He wasn't looking for promises. He was looking for change. Then something unexpected happened. The driver spoke. I've been treated like that before, he said softly. His voice rough but steady. Not always so openly, but you feel it. The looks, the tone, like you're just part of the background, not a person. Keanu didn't interrupt. He just listened, giving the words space to breathe. It's not about the job, the driver went on. It's about being seen. Like, yeah, I drive a car for a living, but I've got a family. I pay my bills. I try to do right by people. That should count for something. The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was honest. The director looked at him, really looked at him. Not as an employee of a famous actor, but as a man who'd just shared something real. It does count, he said. And I'm sorry it hasn't always felt that way. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket, not for a phone or a wallet, but for a small notebook he often carried. He flipped it open to a blank page, scribbled something quickly, then tore it out. He folded it once and handed it to his driver, who took it without looking. Then Keanu stood. We'll finish the paperwork another day, he said to the director. Today was about something more important. The director blinked. You're not staying? I've said what I needed to say, Keanu replied. And you've heard it. That's enough. But before they left, Keanu turned back one last time. One thing, he added. Don't make this about me. Don't tell people Keanu Reeves made us change. Make it about doing the right thing because it's right, not because someone famous called you out. The director nodded, eyes a little brighter. Understood. As they walked out of the bank, the midday sun warm on their faces, the driver finally opened the folded note. His breath caught. Inside, in neat handwriting, were just a few words. You belong everywhere you go. He folded it again, carefully, and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. Outside, the city buzzed as usual, cars honking, people chatting on phones, a street vendor calling out lunch specials. But something had shifted, not in the world, but between them. A quiet understanding, a shared moment of dignity restored. Keanu didn't say much as they walked to the car. He didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful conversations happen in silence. Back in the driver's seat, the engine purred to life. Keanu settled into the passenger side, gazing out the window as they pulled away from the curb. After a few blocks, he spoke, almost to himself. People forget that respect isn't something you earn by your title. It's something you give just because someone's human. The driver nodded, hands steady on the wheel. Most folks don't see it that way. Then we keep showing them, Keanu said simply. And that was it. No grand finale. No dramatic music. Just two men driving through the city, carrying with them a small but meaningful truth. That kindness isn't weakness, and standing up for someone doesn't always require a shout. Sometimes it just takes a quiet word, a steady presence, and the courage to say, "You're with me." Later that week, the bank quietly rolled out new staff training focused on unconscious bias and inclusive service. There was no press release, no fanfare, just a change in how people were treated when they walked through the door. And though no one knew it, that shift started with a single moment of quiet courage. Not from a celebrity, but from a driver who chose to speak up, and a friend who refused to let him stand alone. In a world that often celebrates noise, Keanu Reeves once again proved that the most powerful actions are the ones done without an audience, without expectation, without anything except the simple belief that every person matters. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. The drive back was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels heavy, but the kind that settles between two people who don't need to fill every second with words. The city rolled by outside the windows. Delivery trucks double-parked, kids laughing outside a corner store, a street musician playing an old tune on a slightly out-of-tune guitar. Life just as it always is. Messy, ordinary, beautiful in its own unpolished way. Keanu sat with his hands resting on his knees, looking out at the passing streets, his expression calm but thoughtful. He wasn't thinking about the bank anymore, not exactly. He was thinking about how often people go through their days carrying invisible weights, small slights, quiet dismissals, moments when they're made to feel like they don't quite measure up, and how rarely anyone notices. Beside him, the driver kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was still back in that consultation room, replaying the words he'd spoken, and the ones that had been spoken to him. It wasn't every day someone stood up for you like that. It wasn't every day you felt truly seen. When they pulled into the driveway of Keanu's home, a modest place, nothing flashy, tucked away from the usual Hollywood spotlight, he turned off the engine and sat for a moment before opening the door. Keanu didn't move right away either. He just reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a plain white envelope. It wasn't thick, but it wasn't empty either. "Here," he said, holding it out. "This is for you." The driver hesitated. "You don't have to—" "I know," Keanu interrupted gently. "But I want to." There was no room for argument in his tone, not because he was demanding, but because it came from a place of care, not obligation. The driver took the envelope, fingers brushing the paper lightly, as if testing whether it was real. He didn't open it right away. Not there. Not with Keanu watching. He slipped it into his inside pocket, the same one where he'd tucked the handwritten note earlier. 2 small pieces of paper, both carrying more weight than they appeared to. Inside the house, Keanu made tea, loose leaf steeped just right, and they sat at the kitchen table, the kind with scratches and coffee rings that tell the story of years of use. No assistants, no handlers, no cameras. Just 2 people sharing a quiet afternoon. After a while, the driver excused himself to the restroom. When he came back, he looked different, lighter somehow. He'd opened the envelope in private, standing in front of the mirror, and what he found inside wasn't just money, though there was enough to cover a month's rent, maybe more. Tucked beneath the bills was another note written in the same careful hand. "Thank you for your dignity today. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." That's when the tears came. Not big sobs, but quiet ones. The kind that slip out when you've been holding yourself together for too long. He wiped them away quickly, splashed some water on his face, and took a deep breath before walking back out. Keanu didn't mention it. Didn't ask if he'd read it. He just poured him another cup of tea and said, "You've got a good heart. Don't ever let the world dull it." The rest of the afternoon passed in easy conversation, about nothing important, really. The weather, a new restaurant downtown, an old movie they both liked, but beneath the surface something deeper was happening, a kind of healing. Not dramatic, not instant, but real. Later, as the sun began to dip below the hills, casting long shadows across the yard, the driver got ready to leave. He stood by the car, keys in hand, and turned to Keanu. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "Just keep being you. That's more than enough." And with that, he gave a small nod, the kind that says everything without needing to say a word, and watched as the car pulled away. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, something subtle began to shift in the driver's life, not because of the money, though that helped ease some worries, but because of the message behind it. He started standing a little taller when he walked into places. He met people's eyes more. He spoke up when he needed to, not with anger, but with quiet confidence. One morning, while waiting in line at a coffee shop, he saw a young woman being spoken down to by the barista, something about her order being too complicated. Without thinking, he stepped in. "She's just asking for what she wants," he said calmly. "No need to make her feel bad about it." The barista blinked, then softened. "You're right. Sorry about that. It was a tiny moment. Barely noticeable. But it mattered. Back at the bank, things had changed too. The manager who'd made the comment was still employed. He hadn't been fired, because Keanu never asked for that. But he'd been required to attend sensitivity training and lead a staff workshop on respectful communication. At first, he'd been defensive. But after hearing stories from his own coworkers about times they'd been judged, overlooked, or dismissed, he began to understand. He even apologized again, this time privately, to the driver the next time he came in for a routine errand. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The driver accepted it with grace, not because he forgot what happened, but because he knew people can grow if they're given the chance. Meanwhile, word of what had happened at the bank started to spread. not through gossip sites or viral videos, but through the quiet network of people who work behind the scenes in this city. Security guards, assistants, drivers, receptionists, they all talk. And when they heard that Keanu Reeves had stood up for his driver, not for show but simply because it was the right thing to do, it meant something. It reminded them that kindness still exists, even in places where it's least expected. One evening, the driver got a call from an old friend who worked as a valet at a luxury hotel. "Hey," the friend said, "I heard what happened. Made me proud to know you." They talked for a while, and before hanging up, the friend added, "You know, most folks in his position would have just walked away, but he didn't. That says everything." The driver smiled. "Yeah," he said, "it really does." What Keanu did wasn't about grand gestures or headlines. It was about consistency, about treating people the same whether the cameras are rolling or not. And in a world that often confuses fame with importance, that kind of humility is rare and powerful. The envelope stayed in the driver's top drawer at home, not because he needed the money, but because it reminded him of something bigger, that his worth wasn't tied to his job, his car, or who he worked for. It was tied to his character, and that was something no one could take away. As the weeks passed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Errands were run, appointments kept, long drives taken in comfortable silence. But something had changed, not in the world, but in the way two men moved through it. With a little more awareness, a little more courage, and a lot more care. And sometimes that's all it takes to leave someone speechless, not with shock, but with gratitude. Not with spectacle, but with sincerity. Weeks passed, and the incident at the bank faded from the headlines because, truthfully, it never made the headlines to begin with. There were no paparazzi shots, no viral clips, no outraged tweets demanding justice. It lived instead in the quiet corners of everyday life, in the way a teller now greeted every person who walked through the door with a genuine smile, in the way the manager paused before speaking to someone he didn't recognize, in the small but steady shift toward treating people not by what they do, but by who they are. For the driver, life settled back into its familiar rhythm, early mornings, long drives, quiet evenings. But something inside him had changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was more like a seed that had been planted that day at the bank and had finally begun to take root. He carried himself differently, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty that he belonged wherever he went. And that made all the difference. He started noticing things he hadn't before, the way a grocery clerk's eyes lit up when someone said thank you, the way a stranger held the door open without being asked, the way a simple act of decency could ripple outward, touching people in ways no one could predict. He began paying it forward, not in grand ways, but in the small human moments that often go unnoticed. A kind word to a stressed parent in line, a few extra minutes listening to an elderly neighbor, a quiet "you got this" to a young delivery driver having a rough day. None of it was for show. It was just how he chose to move through the world now, armed not with anger over what had happened, but with compassion born from it. Keanu, for his part, never mentioned the incident again. He didn't bring it up in interviews. He didn't post about it online. He didn't need to. For him, it wasn't a story to be told. It was just something that happened, something that needed to be handled with care, and then left behind. That's the thing about real kindness. It doesn't wait for applause. It doesn't keep score. It simply shows up, does what's right, and walks away. But the world has a way of circling back. One afternoon, months later, Keanu was at a small bookstore downtown, browsing the philosophy section as he often did. He liked places like this, quiet, unpretentious, full of stories waiting to be discovered. As he reached for a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius, a voice behind him said softly, "Mr. Reeves?" He turned. It was a woman in her 40s wearing a bank employee lanyard. She looked nervous, twisting the strap in her hands. "I don't mean to bother you," she said quickly, "but I work at the branch, the one where, well, you know." Keanu nodded gently. "I remember." She took a breath. "I just wanted to say thank you, not just for standing up for your driver, but for how you did it. You didn't yell. You didn't shame anyone, you just made us see what we were missing." She paused, eyes glistening slightly. "After that day, our whole team started talking, really talking about how we treat people. We even started a monthly check-in where we share stories about moments we got it right. Or wrong. It's changed things. For real." Keanu listened, his expression warm but humble. That's not because of me, he said. It's because you chose to listen, she smiled. Maybe, but someone had to start it. They chatted for a few more minutes about books, about the city, about the strange beauty of ordinary days. Then she left, clutching a copy of Meditations, looking lighter than when she'd arrived. Keanu watched her go, then turned back to the shelf. He didn't feel proud. He felt hopeful, because that's what moments like these do. They remind us that change doesn't always come from protests or policies. Sometimes it starts with one person choosing to speak up, one person choosing to listen, one person choosing to believe that everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. Back in his car later that evening, the driver was humming softly to the radio when his phone buzzed. It was a text from an old colleague, a fellow driver who'd heard the story through the grapevine. It read, "Heard what happened at the bank. Made me stand a little taller today. Thanks for that." The driver smiled and typed back, "Just passing it on." That night, as he sat on his porch watching the stars blink awake over the city, he thought about how easy it is to feel small in a world that's always shouting. How easy it is to believe you don't count unless you're famous, rich, or powerful. But Keanu had shown him, without speeches, without fanfare, that none of that matters. What matters is how you treat the person in front of you, right now, in this moment. And that's a power everyone has. Months turned into a year. The bank branch became known, not for its VIP clients, but for its unusually warm service. People started choosing it over others, not because of rates or rewards, but because they felt respected the moment they walked in. The manager who'd once spoken so carelessly was now the one reminding new hires, it's not about who they are, it's about how we make them feel. As for Keanu, he kept living the way he always had, riding his motorcycle through the hills, stopping to help strangers with flat tires, buying coffee for the crew on set, remembering the names of janitors and caterers. To the public, he was a movie star. To the people who knew him up close, he was just a good man who never forgot that fame is temporary, but kindness lasts forever. One day, a journalist asked him in an interview if he ever got tired of people expecting so much from him, of being seen as this almost mythical figure of generosity. Keanu chuckled softly. "I'm just a person," he said. "We all have the same choice every day, to be kind or not. I try to choose kind. That's not special. That's just human." The reporter wrote it down, but the real impact wasn't in the article. It was in the thousands of people who read those words and thought, maybe I can do that too. And that's how the story truly ended. Not with a bang, but with a ripple. A quiet, steady ripple that kept moving outward, touching lives in ways no one could measure but everyone could feel. Because in the end, what left people speechless wasn't what Keanu did that day at the bank. It was the reminder he gave them without even trying that the most powerful thing any of us can be is simply human. And that, more than anything, is worth passing on.